All right, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Danny Nomura. Our topic that we are arguing is, should vaccinations be required for students to enter public school? Now, my proposition is that making vaccinations a requirement to enter public school is the morally correct way to protect the individual as well as the greater society from disease. Now, my first point is that vaccines can and will save the lives of people, including children. Vaccines have been used for hundreds of years, dating all the way back to ancient Chinese civilization, where the Chinese would rub each other with smallpox scabs to inoculate themselves. Now, a simpler example of vaccination could be used by the Bay Area Native Americans, such as the Ohlone, where they would cook with poison oak to vaccinate themselves against the plant, which is a plant that they would see quite often, and they would find themselves affected by it all the time. Now, a personal example, when my family moved to a rural area in the country, we realized that poison oak was a very big factor, and we were all getting it a lot. And so my father actually took up the obligation to start vaccinating himself with poison oak so that he could go out and, number one, pet our dogs, who would always find themselves inside poison oak, affecting all of us. And he would rub a small amount of poison oak on the inner forearm every day for a month. And by the end of the month, he was entirely inoculated to the effects of poison oak. Now, going on, the CDC does highly recommend that all people vaccinate themselves. And in some situations and states, it is required. The CDC has designed 3 schedules for vaccination based on age group. So there's a schedule for ages 0 through 6, a schedule for ages 7 through 18, and a third for ages 19 plus. The reason for trying to vaccinate children as infants is to protect them when they're the most vulnerable and before they are exposed to all these life-threatening diseases out in the real world. Some of the vaccinations required in California include the vaccination for diphtheria, hepatitis B, measles, mumps, tetanus, and many, many more. Schools, preschools, and daycares, of course, where all the children are huge melting pots for the spread of vaccine-preventable sickness. Thus, vaccines do have a strong correlation to the lives of children saved. These children who are in these schools and preschools, they're in close contact constantly throughout the day, and the diseases such as the influenza, which spread very, very easily, can have adverse effects on those who are not vaccinated. Statistically, the CDC estimates that since 2010, there have been up to 26,000 flu-related hospitalizations in children younger than 5 years old. And in America, up to 171 children each year die from the flu. And it's a disease that is preventable by the flu vaccine. Further, medical organizations state that vaccines are safe, and bad reactions to these vaccines are extremely rare. There is absolutely no correlation between vaccines and autism, which is something that is hotly debated. This myth originated with a 1997 paper written by British surgeon Andrew Wakefield. His paper was discredited due to procedural errors and ethical violations in his research. The popular association that Wakefield, as well as a lot of other people, look for is between the MMR vaccine, which is the measles, mumps, and rubella, and autism. This argument states that the rising rate of MMR vaccines in America correlates directly with America's rising rate of autism. However, this argument does draw a fallacy of weak analogy because there is no causal association between MMR and autism. Going on, the ingredients in vaccines are safe for consumers in the small amounts used, despite some of them being a little bit, confusing when you first hear about them. For example, aluminum is used in some vaccines. However, it's used to enhance the immune response in individuals who are vaccinated, so it's got a positive effect. Also, formaldehyde, which is normally associated with bad things, it's used to inactivate certain viruses to keep them from further causing the disease. And lastly, vaccines protect the entire population. Vaccines have already eradicated some diseases such as smallpox, and we are on the way to fully eradicating other deadly diseases such as polio. Smallpox, if it had not been eradicated, would take up to 5 million lives annually, and you can't really put a cost value on that. And by 2000, 80% of the world's children had been immunized to polio, and that number just keeps going up. And if we did not have a vaccination for polio, polio would take up to 2.7 million lives each year. Going on, Vaccinations provide economic benefit to those who are vaccinated as well as to the general population, as taxpayers are where the money goes to pay for these vaccinations and the healthcare. It lowers the care costs for families and health systems, which saves up to $6 billion annually in treatment costs, as well as it saves time caring for the sick children instead of working. So, for example, where the parents would be going to work to make money for their family, instead they have to spend time caring for their sick child. And so they can't be making the money that they need to care for the sick child as well. And lastly, to finish off, when you compare the utilitarian standpoint to the Kantian standpoint, the utilitarian standpoint stating that you should take the action that will minimize total harm, and the Kantian standpoint stating that you should never take an action that explicitly harms a human being, both of these philosophies provide support for pro-vaccination. For example, it is clear that vaccination does minimize total harm to society, supporting the utilitarian standpoint. And from the Kantian standpoint, vaccinations are used to explicitly prevent harm to human beings, not to actually harm them. Thank you.
So some questions I have would, when you say that exposure to small amounts of poison oak and rubbing off smallpox are like different than actual vaccinations that we have today with injections?
Yeah, absolutely correct. However, the similarities that I was trying to draw was that you can self-vaccinate yourself, and these simple vaccinations, while it is an extremely simple version of these large-scale vaccinations, they still are effective and they still do have positive effects on society.
So, but can you really compare the two with the injections and like the other things that they put in injections?
So I don't necessarily think that you can compare the two in the amount of lives saved or the way that it affects a person's life. However, with the comparison I was trying to draw is that people have always been vaccinating in many forms, and that it does provide positive results, despite the fact that it is a very small scale form of vaccination.
When you say that it is immoral or unethical to require someone to go against their religion by getting a vaccination?
You're absolutely correct. However, at the same time, the point that I was trying to draw is that when looking from the utilitarian standpoint, where you're trying to protect the maximum amount of lives, it is very clear that vaccination is in support of providing the most amount of help for the general population. So despite the fact that it is, our First Amendment rights do not require us to do things against our religion or against our beliefs, sometimes you have to look past that. You have to look at the bigger picture, which is saving the most amount of lives.
But then requiring vaccinations, wouldn't that go against somebody's beliefs? So do you think that they would want to do that?
I don't, but at the same time, there are many options for people to educate themselves, or for parents to educate a student, such as homeschooling or such as a private school, where maybe they might not require vaccinations, but the point or the topic at hand is public schools, where you kind of have to bypass the whole First Amendment, the whole religion thing, because it's a public school, it's a public entity, and that means that all walks of life, many different religions, many different standpoints are going to be in there, and you have to protect the general population.
But then, so say somebody that is religious wants to go to a public school, when you say that requiring them to get a vaccination would be discriminatory against some people then, in a way?
Right, in a way you're correct. However, again, I keep coming back to this point that it's discriminizing for a good purpose, and it's discriminizing to save the life of that specific person and the people around them. And you kind of sometimes have to neglect the fact that while it is your religion, it might be sometimes the bigger thing to do to just do the safe thing.
Alright, so my name is Jeremy G, and the topic at hand would be, should vaccinations be required for students to enter public school? And so my resolution would be that requiring students to receive vaccinations before entering public school is unethical because it can take away from people's freedoms and beliefs. Not only that, but vaccinations can also result in some people having negative reactions to the injections. So on September 17th, 1787, arguably the most important document in United States history was signed, the United States Constitution. This document established Americans' national government and fundamental laws and guaranteed certain basic rights for citizens. Requiring students to be vaccinated before attending public schools violates the United States Constitution. Even though vaccines can be beneficial, students should not be required to get them in order to attend a public school because it is unethical. So vaccines can cause negative reactions. They have harmful ingredients in them, and according to the CDC, all vaccines carry a risk of a life-threatening allergic reaction. Long-term seizures, coma, lowered consciousness, and permanent brain damage may be associated with DTaP and MMR vaccines. The CDC reports that pneumonia can be caused by the chickenpox vaccine, and this is according to the Center of Disease Control and Prevention. The National Vaccine Information Center, NVIC, says that vaccines may be linked to learning disabilities, asthma, diabetes, chronic inflammation, and other disabilities, according to the National Vaccine Information Center. And even though that the chances of getting a life-threatening allergic reaction to vaccines is rare, students should not be forced to be put in that position. It should be a decision based on the parents or guardians talking with their child and deciding on their own. Vaccines are unnatural, and natural immortality is more effective than vaccinations. Even pro-vaccine organizations state that natural vaccination causes better immunity. And the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia notes that it is true that natural infection almost always causes better immunity than vaccines, whereas immunity from disease often follows a single natural infection. Immunity from vaccines occurs only after several doses, and that's according to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Mayo Clinic states that natural infection often provides more complete immunity than a series of vaccinations. And the Kurt Perkins, a chiropractor and wellness expert, stated, "A vaccine violates all laws of natural immune defenses by taking a potential pathogen along with all the toxic ingredients directly into your blood system. This process would never occur in building natural immunity." So vaccines can contain ingredients some people consider immoral or otherwise objectionable. So vaccine reactions are very difficult to detect because often multiple vaccines are given together. The synergistic toxicities and multiple adverse interactions occurring, which makes it hard to know what is causing what. Vaccine reactions are also notoriously underreported, as many physicians brush off this symptoms as mere coincidence, denying they have anything to do with vaccination. So mandatory vaccine infringe upon constitutional protected religious freedoms. Several religions oppose vaccines and mandatory vaccinations. Some Christian scientists consider vaccinations against their religion because the Christian state of mind is better preventative to contagion than a drug, or than any other possible sanitative method. So the teachings of the church unequivocally affirm that injections of vaccines are a violation of these biblical teachings, as they are a form of blood pollution, polluting the body. Immunizations and vaccinations are a form of blood pollution because they are devastating effects on the regeneration of the soul that each church member seeks to attain. And that's according to the Church of Illumination. So the government should not intervene in personal medicine choices. Medical decisions for children should be left to the parents and caregivers. Ron Paul, a congressman, states that the point is not that smallpox vaccines are necessarily a bad idea, but rather that intimately personnel medical decisions should not be made by the government. The real issue is individual medical choice. No single person, including the President of the United States, should ever be given the power to make a medical decision for potentially millions of Americans. Freedom over one's physical person is the most basic freedom of all, and people in a free society should be sovereign over their own bodies. When we give government the power to make medical decisions for us, we in essence accept that the state owns our bodies. Also, the cost of vaccines is increasing. According to the New York Times, in 2014, the average cost to fully vaccinate a child with private insurance to the age of 18 was $2,192, and previously in 1986, the total was $100. Some people are unable to pay these high prices, and due to that, it can be seen as discrimination towards the lower income families. In conclusion, although some people may say that vaccinations help the greater good, there has been many cases in which vaccines have affected people in negative ways. Due to the negative consequences people endure, the violation of people's rights, and the discrimination that can be taken away from these requirements, students should not be required to be vaccinated before entering public school.
So I have a couple questions. So, the argument at hand is that it's a government policy that it would be for students to enter public school, and the public school is a government entity. So, would you agree that, first of all, the government's purpose is to protect its nation's people?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, is the government protecting its people by making vaccines non-mandatory? For the general population?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay. And that, so then, speaking on your last point, if these mandatory vaccines were to save lives and money based on the evidence that I have provided, wouldn't that balance out the cost of vaccinating children based on the $6 billion fact that I presented based on time saved, money saved?
I still believe that although it would cut back on some things such as cost, I still believe that it should be up to the parents and the children to decide whether they should be vaccinated or not because of the First Amendment and religion and other things like that.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So, not conclusion, I think. Okay. So, in conclusion, considering the multitude of positives provided by vaccines and the lack of adverse effects of vaccines, I do think it is a shame that it is not accepted by all of society. While those who do not accept the loud and clear evidence in support of it are the minority, they do have a large influence on society, larger than many might comprehend. Because all it takes really is one unvaccinated student, or one unvaccinated teacher, or one unvaccinated person walking around the campus to affect somebody who has maybe not been vaccinated or is not up to date on their boosters, for it to spread terribly, and then multiple people might be affected by this horrible diseases, because they were not vaccinated. So going forward, it is important that adults, most importantly, are educated on the positive societal effects of vaccination, because sometimes these younger students and the classmates might not be able to comprehend really what it means to protect the larger society rather than just the individual. And while society is forming into this state of protecting these safe spaces and protecting people's rights and the personal rights, I do think that it is imperative that at all times we are protecting the general population, the general society, and you always have to look out for your neighbor, no matter what the costs. And education is, of course, the most important step to that. And as the late John Dewey once said, education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself. Thank you.
So, in my opinion, requiring students to be vaccinated before entering public school is unethical because it goes against the First Amendment right. and it goes against the religion and other things like that. Also, I believe that it's somewhat discriminatory against people of lower income families, along with people can see it as going against or like going or aiming towards a certain religion because the religion is against vaccinations. And I do think that vaccinations will help the greater good, but I still don't think that all people or all students should be required to get vaccinations